Welcome to Narrative Infrastructure, a proposal for a new type of civil infrastructure. Modern cities are very complicated, with thousands of stories layered one on top of another. But which stories are meaningful? To begin, we need to map how people's stories interact on the land. If you want to have a meaningful impact within your community, you need to find some place to start. The typical place to start, of course, is to get involved in your local politics and attend the public meetings and to try and help guide your community. There are challenges with that. Most people rarely get involved in local politics because the meeting times are often during working hours, the power groups in the community are not always clear, and the process and the bureaucracy are very slow and complicated. Usually for someone to make this effort, the issue under debate has to be personally important. But what if your effort to tell your story on one issue was meaningful to other issues as well? Maybe even to issues that arise in the future. Narrative infrastructure proposes we manage our communities with our living memories, making our personal lived experience meaningful to how we manage change in our communities. There will occasionally be global or national issues that directly impact local decisions. But if we process those big issues through the local narratives, then how those big issues affect local change is easier to understand. The point of getting involved in politics is to make your lived experience meaningful to the local decision makers. But if you never tell your story to those local decision makers, how can they respond to your story? All stories include a setting, so narrative infrastructure records on a map when and where your stories took place. Now, any future local issue in nearby locations can be influenced by your story. Most countries require public input on every public project over a certain value. Those projects already have a budget for their public engagement, which should be modified to map local stories. When each new project that requires public engagement also builds narrative infrastructure, future projects will benefit from past projects. Primary schools often include homework projects to interview family members. This is a perfect opportunity for young people to both learn from their elders while making their elders' memories important to managing our community. Research by think tanks and universities often includes subject group surveys and interviews. And if these are conducted using spatial narratology, that research will enrich narrative infrastructure. Political action groups can collect oral histories as part of their community research and simultaneously improve their messaging by adding local nuance to their advocacy and highlight areas of cultural conflict, neighborhood by neighborhood. Storytelling associations are already collecting community member stories, and with a little extra effort, each of those stories can be mapped. Philanthropists who would like to give back to their old neighborhood can contract for narrative infrastructure projects to collect and map stories. This will pay for the interviews, transcription, and the mapping, becoming a permanent and ongoing improvement to the local sense of meaning and identity that will be enriched over time as others add their stories. Chambers of commerce and development agencies can highlight market potential in a location by collecting narrative infrastructure stories on an ongoing basis. The more narrative infrastructure already present, the more developers can mitigate their risks associated with public opinion by basing their proposals on local stories. As a result, economic developers and politicians will be able to propose higher quality ideas that are more meaningful to you and your community. Narrative infrastructure will easily demonstrate ideas that might be a good idea statistically, yet fail to be a good fit with the local culture. Those developers can use narrative infrastructure to find a location with a more compatible set of stories or delineate what they would need to change in their proposal to make it part of the local story. Narrative infrastructure will also help communities to test ideas that seem too good to be true. Projects based on short-term opportunism will face organized and heartfelt opposition when they fail to integrate with the local sense of identity. Where two cultures reside in a city, narrative infrastructure will demonstrate where their stories overlap. Those locations are the logical places to organize new shared rituals and celebrations with the two cultures. Given that our neighborhoods already hold our memories, the mental anguish resulting from urban renewal, natural or man-made disasters can be reduced by providing a map of those memories, allowing redevelopment to be informed by past memories. Rebuilding in continuity with past memories makes communities more resilient by helping the people re-anchor to the local context rather than leave. Given the global increase of migration and refugees, it has become important to know about other specific community stories. Narrative infrastructure allows you to read the local stories of places where immigrants are arriving from, and get to understand something of what life is like on the other side of the planet. As urbanization continues to grow, cities are becoming more culturally diverse. Community members of different cultural backgrounds that share neighborhoods will be able to understand each other as people rather than ideologies through their mapped stories. And this can start at home long before confronting the social pressure associated with face-to-face interactions. And immigrants who move to a new city can explore the local stories of their new communities and better understand how to contribute their own stories to the community. Scientists can contextualize their research that they want to communicate to communities by using the audience's stories as a starting point to build a bridge between the research and the local knowledge. This will increase the likelihood of understanding by the community stakeholders because their stories are used to contextualize the information presented in the research. Heritage preservation organizations can use local living memory to contextualize historic assets, encouraging a sense of stewardship by the local community. Tourists can use the narrative infrastructure to experience the continuity of local heritage with the living culture. The overarching goal of narrative infrastructure is to improve each community's sense of place, and to make that sense of place obvious and easy to use by groups that would like to propose local changes. With a robust narrative infrastructure, your memories become meaningful to your whole community and not just to those in your immediate neighborhood, but also to the larger city. How do you get started mapping stories? Well, you start by telling a story and recording it. The next time that you're at a family gathering, take some time to tell the story to your family. We have a free tutorial on our website that will show you how to record the text, voice, and locations in your stories. So why do we need a public narrative infrastructure? The goal of narrative infrastructure is to make your stories meaningful to decisions that change your community. We begin by recording and mapping people's stories. This gives us a detailed map of public sentiment. Community members like school children, the elders of the community, or storytellers can help add local context to grassroots organizing efforts by demonstrating how those new issues are meaningful to the community. People who want to make change will not have to collect opinions and surveys every time to show that a proposal is meaningful to the local community. Civil servants such as lawmakers and administrators, they would want those stories for the exact same reason, to help jumpstart grassroots organizing. But they will also use it for testing their own ideas at the conceptual stage of development. They will look at the local stories to see if their proposals actually make sense with the flow of community narratives. The reverse is also true. They can frame their proposals by using the local stories to help the community understand the proposed change. And of course, economic developers like business development teams, entrepreneurs, and real estate developers, they can make use of narrative infrastructure for similar reasons. To test their business or development ideas at an early stage to make sure that the local market includes narratives that are compatible with their development goals. This will help them to mitigate their risks and also to frame proposals from the local context so that the proposal is in a continuity with personal local history, so that the new proposal seems just like the next chapter in the local story. And in this way, we can actually increase meaningful citizen participation. We record people's stories and map where they think is meaningful about their individual locations, so that future decisions become an evolution of already meaningful stories. What's involved and how do we build narrative infrastructure? Narrative infrastructure is an archive for your stories, but instead of an archive like a library that you search with text, you search by location. Your normal library or online archive is indexed by keywords and themes or subjects. This is very useful if you know the language of the archive and can determine what words to search for. But when we index entries by discrete location, the search results are always locally meaningful, whatever language they're in, or if they're in a different media format. The land is holding our memories. It doesn't matter what language the story is, it doesn't matter how old it is or how new it is. The information is indexed by spatial coordinates. Because we can keep adding stories, narrative infrastructure is an efficient way to gather public opinion on any political or economic proposal without having to take the time and expense of surveying every stakeholder on every issue. Rather than having to go back to the stakeholders for each proposal, politicians, non-governmental organizations, and developers can quickly compile locally relevant stories to aid their understanding of the context under consideration. We can get a head start building narrative infrastructure, of course, because there are already multiple sources of stories. There are tens of thousands of stories already recorded in archives around the world. Every story that's been written down includes a setting and a time, which we can map. Please share this with your local social groups and call your local elected representatives, chambers of commerce, and archivists. We need your help to build the 4 parts of a public narrative infrastructure so it is tamper-proof, reliable, and respects intellectual property rights. Visit our pilot project at narrativeinfrastructure.org. Everything that happens in your community started as a story. We need to make those stories locally useful. For that to happen, we need to know where they are located, because it is your stories that bring our cities to life and make them full of meaning. But we need your help to build a public narrative infrastructure. Thank you.